Welcome to the Real CP Show. I'm your host, CP. And today's topic, St. Patrick's Day. Irish question mark within the US. Celebration, yay! But that Black History Month, why? The insultingness of that. Yes, yes. See this picture that you see in front, I will get into this in a little bit for the ones who might not know what this picture is about. And it is a major part also of Black American history. But again, Black History Month, that was just happened in February. How many personnel within certain parts of the Paname's culture, and how many personnel who want to be like them in certain parts of Paname's culture, and how numbers of immigratingness, and how many numbers of border breaker legal immigrant personnel, and how many numbers of people who play that nonsensical, silly people of color card and minority card, which is an insult to numbers of American blacks. Right. And again, I'm not talking about the ones that are gullible and naive not to understand how it sounds to let people dilute down Black American history and be calling Black folks people of color and minority. Right. Because in this topic today of Irishness, they would have been called Irish people also minorities. You see how that goes. Some of them, they probably would have said people of color if they had a little bit of tint to the skin. Most will not, right? But I'm just saying the games that's played upon American blacks. So today is March the 17th, 2025. Another St. Patrick's Day, right? Oh my goodness, Irish celebrations recognizing Irish Americans. What? Irish Americans? Just say they're supposed to say the Americans. And this is what they doing when they know numbers of American blacks who unfortunately are not who not very they know the majority of American blacks collectively are not about history, right? They know that. And so they know that they can play the silly, diluting, minimizing card to millions of American blacks about not knowing the power of history and to feel a little shameless to sit there and talk about Black American history, the one this applies to. And this is what certain ones, even with an unfortunate Irishness, do as well. Yes, and this is the ones that applies to. Because remember, you say the word Irish, you're like, what does that mean? Because that's nothing but a version of ethnicity under the Caucasian Anglo category of race in America, right? And again, right, for the people who don't know, it wasn't a long time ago that was still going on in the early 1900s that numbers of Irish personnel still wasn't accepted as white, right? But at the same time now, numbers of Irish personnel are accepted as honorary white, and how many the ones applies to, right? The ones that still having hatred toward American blacks, but do not want American blacks to sit there and checkmate that stuff. And it's an insult because places that have certain numbers of Irish personnel, the one it applies to, right? Especially up in those Boston areas and certain parts of New York and certain parts of New Hampshire and certain parts of, you get the point, the ones applies to, right? There are numbers of American blacks. How many American blacks knowing will be like, what are you talking about? There's still some hatred among certain types of Irishness toward American blacks. What are you talking about? This is 21st century, right? Come on, the ones that know that'll tell you that, right? But at the same time, oh my goodness, um, Irish, I mean, St. Patrick's Day, yes, or St. Patty's Day, the other word to it, right? We must celebrate Irish, Irish American accomplishments, right? But that old bad Black American month stuff, oh man, we need to stop talking about that. That's woke. That's woke stuff, right? You see the insulting, patheticology of the demonicnism that they tell numbers of American blacks. I'm not talking about the gullible ones and naive ones. Hey, stop talking about Black American, history. Even though Black Americans have been in this country more than numbers of what we call Irish personnel, in more ass numbers, by the way. Right? I'm gonna get to this video in a little bit about something. And by the way, just a piece of historical history for the people who don't know. St. Patrick's, well, that's supposed to be a patron saint of Ireland, right? Which is for St. Patrick's Day is named out of, wasn't even Irish. Let me say this again for people who didn't hear me. The patron saint, St. Patrick, that is supposed to what they're supposed to name, the name that is named for celebration of St. Patrick's Day. St. Patrick wasn't even Irish. Right? He was born in what was called Romanized Britain at that time. On that situation quite a while ago. He was born in Roman Britannis. He was captured by Irish, should we say, human smugglers and brought back to Ireland, right? As a non-black captured person, right? And he escaped years later, and he brought back Christianity when he was converted over. He brought Christianity back to Ireland, right? So he wasn't even Irish. You said this goes. But look right now, 2025, by the way, for people who may not know, March is also considered Irish American History Month. Right? But American blacks, by the means, are told, why you got to talk about Black History Month, right? Huh? My goodness, you need to get over that kind of stuff. Right? But what I just say, March is also Irish American History Month. But you got people that see nothing, they hear nothing, and they know nothing. Right? How many people walking around celebrating St. Patrick's Day have no idea where St. Patrick's Day celebration comes from? And some of these things that are not what didn't even come from Ireland, right? That have been circularized and stuff like that, and celebrityized, right? Should we say, right? To sit there and bring more tourists in certain places. So some of that stuff people are thinking is Irish has nothing to do with Ireland. It was more for touristy type people. But again, you talk about American Black history. Oh my goodness, you need to get over it. But it's okay to talk about St. Patrick's Day and the Irish, the Irish Americans and how they work hard. Mm-hmm. And how they for humanity and they liked everybody. Wrong some. But I'm gonna get to this in a little bit. Actually, let me get to it in a few seconds, right? So also keep this in picture in mind what you see right here, because again, this was a major thing that was done by certain numbers of Irish when this happened, and which they burned this particular building almost to the ground, right? Or they was trying to burn this building to the ground. That included black kids and women and maybe a few males. Yes, this was done by numbers of Irish personnel mobs. that had anti-American black hatred. Right? I'll get to that in a little bit if I don't forget. So let me get this off the screen. And let me go ahead and play this particular video because this was all about, right? March the 17th, 2025, right? St. Patrick's Day or St. Patrick's Day that had nothing to do with St. Patrick, who was supposed to be the patron saint, a certain type of patron saint in Ireland, that he wasn't even Irish. But we're gonna celebrate that. Yay! And the two largest places on the planet who celebrate that is Ireland, of course, and America. And by the way, it's going to be more people in America that's going to celebrate a lot more in percentage wise than even in Ireland. Because by the way, for people might not know, there is more people in America who celebrate. Oh, excuse me. There is more people in America who claim Irish ancestry than even in the entire Ireland. There is more people who claim Irish ancestry in America than the whole island of Ireland. What? Yes, there is more people in America that claim Irish ancestry than the whole island of Ireland. Right? Okay, I guess. Right? But if American blacks are like, hey, you know what? Some want to relay over black native ancestry. You got people, oh my goodness, where are they at? They were put within a broad box, right, on that situation and diluted numbers of black natives out, right, which are still around. Not that many, but again, when you don't know the history, then you just buy into anything, right? And the ones that want to sit there and say African ancestry, which is also true as well for the ones who want to claim that on that. But then you got one certain parts of Africa, the ones that play cards to, oh, you're not African. You like, I know you ain't talking. And how many places got colonized and made to sit there and speak a colonizing language. And I'm not talking about the ones, hey, I got nothing to do with that, but we speak a colonized language, but they understand to not look down upon other people, to understand that American blacks are like a type of cousinness and stuff like that. And knowing that many come from Africa to America, and know that for without the American blacks in America, many wouldn't be able to come over to America. Heck, by the way, many other places and stuff like that, in places that are able to come over, the one applies to, right? Also, you know, off the backbones of American blacks have to go through, right? Because American blacks would be not considered citizens of this country, right? Even though black American blacks have built this country. So through the blood and sweat and tears and more blood and sweat and tears, right? Against segregationist hatred laws and policies, etc., and various types of political personnel that were segregationists and had anti-American black hatred and things like this, and so many entities and numbers of businesses and etc., that wanted to get away from American blacks. How many schools and colleges that didn't allow American blacks to those campuses, etc., right off the backbones of black pain. Many people benefit off American blacks went through. Now they get to taste the benefits of off that instead of American blacks being the benefit off that. Do you see the most good of that? But let's go ahead and play this clip.
Now, crowds flooded the streets of South Boston today to celebrate over a century of tradition, and that's something WBZ's Logan Hall wouldn't miss for anything.
All about, you know, the friends, the family, having fun, just having a great time, all about the positive attitude in Boston.
Oh my god, it's so wild. Like every time, like you can't match the spirit in Boston. Like it's so much fun. Like everyone here is always like, I have a great time. And like I always have a great time with my friends.
This family made the trip all the way out from Ireland to experience St. Patrick's Day in America. They say Boston does a pretty good job.
Everybody is absolutely amazing here. It's like being in Ireland, like, so we're really very excited.
It was a sea of green, the streets painted with beads and confetti. Parade goer Mark says this is the soul of South Boston.
The Irish have been here for hundreds and hundreds of years, so it's like
the soul of South.
Oh, it's gonna have a little mute. So the thing about it, he's a freaking liar. Because the thing about it is that he said hundreds of years. That's a freaking lie, right? He means some were in America, because you didn't start having the influx of numbers of Irish personnel until around the 1840s, 1850s, while the devastating potato famine was tearing up numbers of Irish personnel in Ireland, left, right, they was going through extreme povertyness, right? Extreme povertyness, right? Extreme. And what was going on in America? American blacks were going through what? Segregation, slave codes that was going on. While the potato famine was going on in Ireland, and many were running as fast place from trying to run from Ireland, American blacks were sitting there experiencing inhumanity within Americanism. Various parts of Americanism, right, was going through slave codes. Actually, slavery was still going on. It was still going on in the influx of numbers of Irish personnel, more of them in the potato famine of 1840s, 1850s. So while they were escaping, right, because Irish personnel couldn't stop the famine over there in Ireland, many were running as fast as possible away from Ireland to get away from that extreme poverty to come to America, right? While at the same time, American blacks were sitting there going through in slavery. What in the hell, right?
Boston.
the Irish have been here for hundreds and hundreds of years, so it's like, and they know how to enjoy and celebrate a day.
A tradition synonymous with the city of Boston. Reporting from the parade, Logan Hall.
Looks like he had a good time. You're looking at what transit police seized from people coming into that event. Keep in mind the rule is no public drinking, but T Police shared photos of multiple gallon jugs they seized. These are known as Borgs or blackout rage gallons.
Oh, see, ain't too many people heard about that, right? Oh, see, they don't want to talk about, wait a minute now, those numbers of non-blacks, the one this applies to, that were bringing this stuff in, getting toasted off of this nonsensical beverage, right? Right? Acting violent, acting rowdy, acting drunk. Oh, well, they just sitting there enjoying themselves. Now, if this was American blacks doing something like this, oh my goodness, they don't know how to act. I mean, the games that millions of American blacks, but with very few exceptions, don't understand the insultingness that numbers of people do every day within certain parts of predominant culture, and ones that slide under the predominant based culture of Anglo and white, who know they are, who are dip in and dip back out. Whoa, we're not white. We are this ethnic background, that ethnic background, but you consider white. Well, but at the same time, let me get out of here with that game, right?
That's a mix of alcohol, electrolytes, flavoring, and water. Now, within the last few minutes, Boston police tell us they've arrested 13 people, including one juvenile. The charges range from disorderly conduct to destruction of property, all the way up to assaulting a police. The charges range from disorderly conduct to destruction of property, all the way 13 people, including one juvenile. The charges range from disorderly conduct to destruction of property, all the way up to assaulting a police officer.
Oh, they don't want to talk about. Oh, they don't want to talk about that part, right? Right? No, 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 no. Because it's just the Negroes in America that just commits the most crimes and don't know how to act. And, they already commit, they're the most criminality aspect. Even though the number one people in Americanism who commit the most crimes is numbers of personnel within the Panama-based culture. The ones who have the most hatred for the American black is numbers of personnel within certain parts of the Panama-based culture, right? The number one victims in America against that is anti or that is hatred put upon them is American blacks. But you have some foods within certain parts of the Panama culture. One applies to, oh my goodness, black people always playing the race card because my goodness, it ain't all. I'm not playing that little silly, sadistic little deflection. I'm not playing that. Right. So there are too many numbers of people within certain parts of Panama culture who know they are. They dip in and they have a hatred for American blacks, dip back out, say, y'all playing the race card, dip in. Oh my goodness, black folks criminality. When you check that tail, right? Oh my goodness, y'all playing the race card again. I'm not playing that game, right? But now, let me go ahead and remove this for a second. For I'm almost getting close to talking about this picture. I actually want to read something. This is a few little things because I'm actually falling behind on the schedule I'm having. So I'm gonna kind of speed up a little bit. This is called, well, I'm about to read The Hate and Despise the Negro, to hate and despise the Negro towards an understanding of 1860s Irish attitudes toward African Americans, not Native Americans, not Asians, not Hispanics, not other immigrant groups, right? But African Americans, or better terminology, American blacks, right? 150 years ago, which is a little bit more than that, because this article is in 2013, so it's a little bit more than that. So 150 years ago, this month, one of the defining moments in 19th century American history occurred when the Emancipation Proclamation took effect. Abraham Lincoln shifted the war from one to preserve the Union to a struggle to both restore that Union and free the enslaved African American people. Wrong. Abraham Lincoln. See, this is why the power of history. This is why they don't like the numbers of American blacks to know the power of history. They don't like it at all because then they can play little white lies and little switcher and deflection tactics, right? Which is a major problem toward American blacks, right? It's a gigantic problem of not knowing the power of history. Abraham Lincoln basically was talking about how if he could have not freed the slaves and basically won the Civil War, he would have done it. On the opposite, Abraham Lincoln was relaying if he had to free the slaves to also win the war, he would have done it. And he basically was saying that basically between white and black, there's too much animosity, not blacks toward whites, especially at that time, right? Which is still going on certain ones, the ones it applies to, right? Because it's bad when you have certain numbers within Panamese culture, right, that would get mad at certain ones within certain parts of the Panamese culture as well, small amount, who are like, this is wrong to treat American blacks like that. And you had quite a numbers of person within Panamese culture who's like, what are you talking about? Oh man, you Wiggers, which means you like black people, right? You see how that goes. But at the same time, the power of history, many people don't even know about that, right? But like in this celebration of Irish American history, right? Which is Irish American History Month, by the way, again, right? But Black History Month, oh my goodness, why we got to talk about that? Why? The hypocrisy, right? So he talks about how perhaps the most challenging task when looking at the Irish American experience of the American Civil War, which is between 1861 and 1865, by the way, for people who might not know, is attempting to comprehend why so many Irish felt such antipathy towards the Black community. Yes, let me read this again. Perhaps the most challenging task when looking at the Irish American experience of the American Civil War is attempting to comprehend, which there is no comprehension to that, why so many Irish felt such antipathy, which means basically a disgusting hatred toward American Blacks, by the way, towards the Black community. Such ill feeling found its full expression in events such as the lynchings and beating of New York's African Americans during the 1863 draft riots. Which is also part of this picture, which you see right here, which was an orphanage of numbers of American Black kids and numbers of women, things that would happen in wars and, the things that would happen in general, right? Where this was a refuge for a number of the ones that were able to try to come there, right? But at the same time, when you start talking about some real history within Americanism, right, relating to a number of Irish, the ones it applies to, they had an extreme demonic hatred of American Blacks. This is what some people be doing. You be like, hey, there was a number of Irish people that had an extreme hatred of American Blacks, right? And it wasn't a small amount. This is what people be doing.
Sorry, Kevin Bacon wasn't in Footloose. What? Of course he was. No, he wasn't. You lose. Of course he was. He was the star. Nope, you're wrong. Look it up. I don't have to look it up. It's common knowledge. He was on the cover of People magazine when the movie. Everyone knows Kevin Bacon was a star of Footloose. It was a huge movie. He was the lead. No.
Oh, they don't like hearing that truth, right? When it's related to American Blacks, right? You got to minimize American Black pain, right? But why in this topic, we got to celebrate the Irish accomplishments. Oh my goodness, the Irish Americans. Oh my goodness, they have just succeeded so much, right? So much. And numbers of them had the hatred of demonism toward American Blacks. But many people don't want to talk about that, which is disgusting, right? And it's insulting to the American Blacks ancestors who was alive at that time frame, who also was the victims of certain numbers of Irish ones, right? Oh, it's some other ones too within certain parts of Bonami's culture. Don't get it confused today. It's who he learned it from, right? But there's still a thing called responsibilities and accountability as well. But it didn't matter because none of the Irish people were trying to escape the famine, again, of the potato famine that was ravaging Ireland in the 1840s and 1850s. So they're trying to run away as fast as possible to get away, right? Just keep that in mind. Let me read some here. It is perhaps inevitable that we tend to view the majority Irish attitude of the 1860s toward African Americans, slavery, and emancipation with modern eyes, with modern sensibilities. You see how that goes, right? As a result, we are rightly disgusted and horrified at the level of Latin racism prevalent in Irish American communities of the war era toward American Blacks, by the way. There is little doubt that unique factors influence Irish attitudes toward African Americans from almost the moment they stepped off the boat in the United States. Let me read this again. There is little doubt that unique factors, they weren't unique factors, they had numbers of hatred. It wasn't unique by nothing. God, but these people try to minimize stuff as well on a slick side. There is little doubt that unique factors influence Irish attitudes toward African Americans from almost the moment they stepped off the boat in the United States. This was recognized by none other than Frederick Douglass, himself a former slave, former black slave, who knew the Irish well. What he wrote in this excerpt from this article, it's a good article, still, regardless, or some of this, the Irish who at home readily sympathize with the oppressed everywhere are instantly taught when they step upon our soil in the U.S. to hate and despise the basically American black Negro. Let me read this again. The Irish who at home readily sympathize with the oppressed everywhere are instantly taught when they step upon our soil, America, to hate and despise the Negro. But at the same time, right? Yay! St. Patrick's Day. Yay! Irish. Yay! In the U.S. Yay! But Black History Month, why? Do you see the insultingness of this? It's an insult. They are taught to believe that he eats the bread, talking about American blacks, that they are taught, the Irish, that he eats the bread that belongs to them. The cruel lie is told to them that we deprive them of labor and receive the money which would otherwise make its way into their pockets. Sir, the Irish Americans will one day find out his mistake. Not quite. I'm going to stop right here on that. Stop right here. Oh, you know what? Let me read something else. While the colored people are thus elbowed out of employment, while a senseless enmity, E-N-M-I-T-Y, in the Irish is excited against us, while state after state it acts laws, hatred laws, slave code laws against us, while we are being hunted down like wild beasts, while we are oppressed with a sense of increasing insecurity, the American Colonization Society, with its hypocrisy written on its brow, comes to the front, awakens to new life, and vigorously presses its scheme for our expatriation upon the attention of the American people. Yes, it was a damn insult. See, they weren't talking about repatriating numbers of Irish personnel back to Ireland. They weren't talking about repatriating other types of immigratingness, Scottish type personnel back to Scotland, right? You get the point. Now, because remember, for people to know, the major personnel, the three largest populations in the 1840s, 1850s was only three. What we call white, what we call Native American, and what we call the Negro, the American black. Those are the three largest populations, not Hispanicism. That's a generic worded terminology. Which Hispanics, right? The only thing that means, keyword Hispanic, means speaking of a Spanish language. So we're not going to play that game on that part. And Asians, that wasn't even thought of like that in that situation, because you didn't really have the influx of what we call Asians. And what is that supposed to mean? Because Asia is a continent. And the only really certain caste system of certain ones within certain Asianness was Japanese, where that was kind of coming over a little bit. And that was starting around 1849, what we call the California gold rush in 1849. So at the same time, You didn't hear a number of the Irish personnel coming from certain parts of the eastern coast, going way across there to the western coast of California, and telling numbers of Chinese people, "Hey, y'all go back, right?" You don't hear no American colony society telling numbers of Chinese people to get back over to repatriate them somewhere else. Oh, I forgot, because no one else has the culture of hatred put upon American blacks, right? At this level, with no reparations, right? On that. You got China Exclusion Act that was going on 1800s. You got number of the Chinese personnel present moment. You ain't gonna tell them to forget about history. You ain't gonna sit there and tell them, hey, certain Japanese, China situation, people still kind of animosity toward that. You're not gonna tell certain type of Hispanicism to forget about certain history where none of them were getting colonized in certain parts of Hispanic countries, the one it applies to, right? You ain't gonna tell them to forget about history. You see how this goes, right? But American blacks are told forget about history, right? You ain't gonna tell people about Ireland, hey man, we don't want to talk about that old famine stuff, that old terrible ravaging potato famine. You're like, well, who's responsible to that, right? Who are these people that look like in Ireland that you ran from? Who they look like, right? So won't you blame them? Nope. But they came over, the ones I'm talking about, which is quite a number, right? With very small exceptions, came over to the United States, right? And had a hatred for the American blacks. A hatred. Not hatred for Native Americans, not hatred to some Hispanics. By the way, there wouldn't even been that many Hispanics over in the Eastern Coast in the first damn place. By the way, in 13 colonies, right? Prior to the American Revolutionary War, right? Late 1700s, for people who don't know, the American Revolutionary War. 13 colonies, and basically 13 colonies had either slavery or indirect slavery. Not sitting there and put them on slave and putting American blacks on slave markets, right? Slave codes. Arguing about this country, arguing about if this state, that state, if we don't want that to expand to that state, don't want to expand to that state, right? They weren't talking about, oh my goodness, they weren't sitting there fighting against numbers of Irish personnel going to different places. Oh, no, right? They won't put Irish personnel on slave markets in South Carolina, in places in New York. Oh, I forgot. Some people don't know that, huh? Yes, New York also had slave markets. Yes. How many places up in Massachusetts and going up there also had slave markets? The places who know who I'm talking about are benefit off slavery of American blacks, not Irish. And some people got some effing nerve. Irish people were sitting there enslaved the hell out of here. Go to hell. They were never put in slavery in America. Go to hell with that. You're not going to find some gigantic, not even a piece of Irish personnel being put on slave blocks left and right, like American blacks, put on plantations, working for free left and right, right? Numbers of personnel within plant-based culture wrapping up, R-A-P-I, the word wrapping up Irish women, right? Making them confused. But they weren't sitting there wrapping up Irish males. They weren't buck breaking, right? Which means wrapping a male, wrapping another male of Irishness. They weren't doing that to them left and right. But you got people, hey, do y'all not understand that? Well, at the same time, my goodness, now
Sorry, Kevin Bacon wasn't in Footloose. What? Of course he was. No, he wasn't. You lose. Of course he was. He was the star. Nope, you're wrong. Look it up. I don't have to look it up. It's common knowledge. He was on the cover of No People magazine.
Oh no, they don't want to hear that kind of truth. When you start putting that information, they don't like that. One of the last parts of this article, a piece of it here. Douglas had identified two of the major drivers that led to the conflict between the Irish and African Americans. Discrimination immediately placed Irish immigrants at the base of the white social order because they were not accepted as white. They was considered consistent as others, off-white, but they were considered white. So the nerve of certain numbers of Irish, the ones applies to, even 21st century, because how many numbers of American blacks in certain eastern cities who know they are in some other places, they were like, what are you talking about? They still know some Irish personnel that have hatred toward American blacks. But then they'll dip back out and play like they playing dumb. Right? Oh, yeah. Oh, there are some of the Irish personnel who try to play dumb. The ones applies to, and they act like this. The ones applies to, they see nothing, they hear nothing, and they know nothing. I'm talking about the ones that applies to, because there's some good Irish personnel like anything else, and there are quite a number of bad ones, right? That want to play deceitful little games and act like they don't know what's going on. Some of them do. Who cares? Ignorance of reality is not acceptable. Nope. On that. Talks about how where they necessarily viewed freed African Americans as their closest social rivals. In turn, this led to the two communities often directly competing for employment. In such circumstances, the Irish often felt they had to turn on their one advantage in the mid 19th century against their white skin. Oh, excuse me. They had to turn to their one advantage in the mid 19th century America, their white skin. They weren't white, considered white, but the skin white, and they still utilize that against American blacks. Right? But we're gonna pretend you don't know nothing, right? The one of them was the Irish person, they're gonna pretend they don't know. There are ones who do know. Now, numbers of those kids, right? You know, their parents ain't gonna tell them that. Whereas certain numbers of Irish personnel may not know. Not gonna sit there and play that. There are ones who do know, and they gonna tell them kids that, right? There are numbers of colleges and numbers of high schools and junior high schools and etc. There are people who know, but they ain't gonna sit there and talk about that, right? But yay, or they ain't gonna talk about, especially the ones who know that St. Patrick wasn't even Irish, but again, from Romanized Britain, right? I ain't gonna talk about that. They ain't gonna talk about what I'm talking about, how numbers of quite a number of Irish personnel had an ingrained demonic hatred toward American blacks when they came over, the ones supplies to, right? They didn't have a hatred toward numbers of people who were sitting there treating them bad, like certain numbers of personnel within the Polymace culture. They weren't talking them crazy because they knew their place. They weren't talking to numbers of Native Americans crazy. They weren't talking to the very small amount of Hispanics that slightly would have been somewhere in that area, and that would have been slightly. Do you understand? They want to talk to some other immigrant groups, which would have been minute, beyond minute. They want to talk to them crazy. They were competing against them. The only person that was competing against is American blacks. And the nerve, some damn people that plays a little border, silly ass immigration little tactics right now. Oh my God, who's going to do the jobs, you know, that Americans want to do? Piss off, right? When American blacks have been doing the jobs that many people didn't want to damn do. So stop. Let alone many cultures and backgrounds weren't even in a damn America in the early 1800s. So stop. Let on the 1700s. So stop that bullshit. Right? The ones who play that game, what they're not. But at the same time, that's why numbers of American blacks better get the hell on board with the power of history. Right? By the way, lastly, another strong factor at play with the Irish support for the Democratic Party. The Democrats opposed the Emancipation Proclamation. The Democrats opposed the Emancipation Proclamation, but had won our support through their pro-immigrant outlook. The Democrats opposed the Emancipation Proclamation, but had won Irish support through their pro-immigrant outlook. Mm, 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 mm. Wow. See, that's the power of history. See, they know not enough American blacks gonna know the power of history. And here it is now. You got Howard politicals playing certain tactics, the ones that are doing this. Because like anything else, you have good people and some bad people. And even these political ones, there are good ones and bad. And it's interesting. It's a disrespect to true democracy. You only have two major political parties. That's the insult to true democracy. Right. But that's a whole different situation in itself on that. So I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to close that part out. And one last article I wanted to read for a second here, where it talks about, I gotta watch these particular words. Boston has a race and sports problem, but it talks about, but it's hardly alone among liberal cities. It's hardly alone among some liberal cities, but I'm not going to go into all the other stuff to this article. But I'm going to read just a few parts. A number of Boston, a certain type of professional basketball, some league players, they have spoken about racial racism in the city. But to say it's an isolated case is to misunderstand America, right? Because that's the thing about it. Various parts within certain parts of Americanism, they love to sit there and minimize black pain of American blacks, but they ask better not minimize what that old bad Hitler did in Germany to a certain type of Jewish people. Your ass better not minimize that. Your ass better not sit there and minimize Chinese exclusion laws, and you better not minimize, oh my goodness, certain numbers of Chinese people going through certain things, not from the hands of American blacks, but certain ones within the predominant culture were doing them wrong. But you better not minimize that. You better not sit there and minimize World War II, right, where certain numbers of Japanese personnel were attacking Pearl Harbor, right, and caused some of the most destructive stuff in American history, besides the American Civil War and, basically all those kind of stuff like that, especially race issues, what I'm getting at on that. But you better not minimize that part, right? You better not. You better not minimize Native Americans, whatever that's supposed to mean, because again, it's black natives. And there's some people, unfortunately, that don't even realize that, yes, there are black natives, and yes, not all black natives were eradicated. There are black natives around, may not be that many. Matter of fact, when you say Native Americans, they'll only make up a couple of million. So we ain't gonna play that game. How many of them are $5 Indians? One supplies to. So we're not gonna play that. But you ain't gonna tell what we call Native Americans, wink, wink, right? Whatever that's supposed to mean. Right? You're not going to tell them, forget about what the white man did to us, what the white man did to us. You ain't tell them that. Nope. And how many, several hundred of those tribes, which is a whole different game in itself, getting reparations, right? And you ain't going to minimize talking about the white man took their land. Nope. But anytime dealing with American blacks, you got to minimize. And unfortunately, millions of American blacks continue to allow people to just salivatate in the faces of American blacks. And it's an insult to American black ancestors who have lost their freaking lives fighting to be treated as citizens. It's an insult to numbers of the elders as of right now in 2025, the ones that are still alive, with very few exceptions, because there are some coons, there's some older coons, and some little gullible ones too. So Uncle Tom's that's still around too, in elderly age bracket. That should know better. But so age by itself don't mean nothing. But I'm talking about the ones that are not coons and sellouts. It's an insult to them. Well, they saw the formal colored sign, the formal hatredness that was put upon their person's parent and parents, or they knew of some others. They went through formal Jim Crow laws in the 50s and the 60s and the 40s and some in the 70s. That certain desegregation was still going on. So getting back to this particular individual, this professional basketball team, former or current. He talks about that some people were shocked when he recently spoke about Boston fans' treatment of black players. You mean American black players, right? It ain't that many other black skinned ones from certain parts of Africa, certain parts of certain beautiful islands in the Caribbean. So we're not going to play that, minimizing. If he had received any negative treatment from the Boston fan base, he said, I definitely think there is a group of amount within a Celtic nation that is extremely toxic, you mean anti-American black, and does not want to see athletes, mean American black athletes, use their platform to talk about some other ones shut the hell up and play basketball. But they don't tell anybody else that who can talk about their cultures and their backgrounds and their issues, right? Won't tell them that. Let's start with the city that started the conversation. Boston is known as the city center of Democratic royalty, the home of the Kennedy clan and 20th century classical liberalism. It's home to elite colleges such as Harvard, MIT, which is a whole different topic of certain numbers of Asians, the ones applies to, right? The ones who had a disdainment for American blacks, who was right there with a certain other personnel within a certain part of economics culture who was able to slide under that banner, but they're not quite that. But at the same time, if you brought up something about that bad hotla, they'll call you I don't want to go on all that, Semitic. I'll put it like that. Right? It's a whole different topic that none of the American blacks just tolerate that situation as well. People disrespect American blacks, but you better not talk about, hey, let's start talking about that old bad hotla. Hotla was way across the Atlantic Ocean, way across there in Poland and Germany and certain parts of England, et cetera, et cetera. Let's not talk about that. It's way over there. You better not minimize that. But at the same time, certain numbers of Asian persons, getting back to the topic or this particular part of MIT and should I say Harvard, where numbers of Asians were used to sit there and dismantle what we call affirmative action and certain in various types of colleges to not be able to use per se race quota when at the same damn time affirmative action not having a damn thing to do with basically American blacks. The person who benefited the most off affirmative action were certain numbers of women within the Palm-based culture and many types of immigrating groups and other different people as well. So we're not gonna play that bullshit ass game. That's the problem. Numbers of American blacks don't know how to sit there and checkmate people. They don't mean they're gonna agree with you. Some will, some won't, right? Because it ain't about that. But you letting people know you ain't gonna play that damn game. It's any kind of game. Right? He talks about how now, oh, by the way, remember I talked about we talked about the potato famine in 1840s, 1850s, right? And how numbers of Irish personnel were also coming over, running as fast as possible from Ireland, getting to America, having hatred toward American blacks. No, I'm just giving an example, 1840s, 1850s, where he's talking about even Frederick Douglass was talking about that, right? Utilizing that. 100 plus years later, in 1974, Bostonians violently resisted desegregation. In 1974, Bostonians violently resisted desegregation. In 1974, Bostonians, white Bostonians, Irish Bostonians, the one applies to, violently resisted desegregation, particularly in the South Boston, the city's prominent Irish Catholic neighborhood. The prominent Irish Catholic neighborhood. So how many of those hateful field ass numbers of Irish personnel one applies to were sitting there pseudo wink practices Catholicism, but at the same damn time, their parents of themselves ran from Ireland, came over to New York, came to Boston, came to New Hampshire, came to Connecticut, you get the damn point, different other places, and had a hatred sit there for American blacks. Man, get out of here with that. Man, I'm telling American blacks about to stop allowing people to play these little silly games. It talks about how these protests led to the busing crisis, where school buses transporting black children, American black children, to desegregated schools were bombarded with eggs, bricks, and bottles. These anti-American black protests by these particular Irish personnel, white Irish personnel, the ones applies to, that couldn't even be the one that became honorary personnel within the Palm-based culture, right? They had a not only a few generations before that had a anti-American black demonic hatred of American blacks. Now became and accept honorary ones within the predominant culture. My goodness. Had a anti-American black protest that led to the busing crisis, where school buses transporting American black children to desegregated schools were bombarded with eggs, bricks, and bottles. I didn't say that these protests were led to the busing crisis, where these school buses was transporting numbers of Asians, whatever that's supposed to mean, because there's Afro-Asiatic people. But they weren't talking about white Hispanics, right? They weren't talking about Native Americans. They weren't talking about numbers of immigrating other groups like that. They weren't talking about border breaking illegal immigrants, because that wasn't happening like that. They were talking about they was trying to transport black children to desegregated schools, were bombarded with eggs, bricks, and bottles. But at the same damn time, people want to sit there and sell it. Well, anyway, all the gigantic celebration was St. Patrick's Day. We must sit there and celebrate St. Patrick, who wasn't even Irish, right? Wasn't even Irish. But at the same time, oh my goodness, no, the Lucky Charms and all that stuff like that, right? Celebrating, somebody drinking this and drinking that, how many people getting rowdy and drunk. Okay, how people do their thing, whatever it is, right? It's on them. Right, because American blacks do that. Oh my goodness, the Negroes don't know how to act, right? And I'm not talking about some gullible ones and some naive ones. I'm not talking about that, unfortunately, right? But collective American blacks are not like that, right? And collective American blacks they are not going to sit there and be celebrating the one special who know about the history. Or if they don't know, it's an embarrassment to sit there and be celebrating St. Patrick's Day. Now, now if they have some other Irish friends or some other people like, hey man, would you mind come celebrate with us, have some fun? No, someone's like, hey, whatever, that's fine. Do their thing. But just to be out celebrate for the heck of it, when you got American blacks in there going through black pain, it's messed up. So hold on for a second. I think I'm gonna finish that up here. Oh, there was. But it was that's a racism. Why? Oh, there was a particular professional basketball personnel. They also relayed this. A certain person, I won't say the name here. He described certain type of fans in Boston in this particular major basketball league, should we say, as racist, as FUCK. Right? I'm just going to leave it at that. He recalled being cussed at and having beer bottles thrown at him. And today he is still a major professional basketball icon. And he said he recalled being cussed at and having beer bottles thrown at him. And another particular, maybe former, maybe current, again, professional basketball person in this particular league, said he and another major superstar that's still playing right now in 2025, I think still playing, were called the N-word by these particular Celtic fans. But at the same time, we want to act like that, see nothing, you got people that want to do like this. Give me a second here. Got some people that want to do this. Wrong one. Give me one moment here. Now, what I just read, you got some people that are just like this. You got some people that do like this. They see nothing, they hear nothing, and they know nothing. They didn't say we were talking about they was doing this to other cultures like that. They was talking about they was doing this to American blacks. Right? In Boston. But that's the hidden thing. So getting close to the finishing finishing this right here. let me close this out. This right here was related to what they call a colored orphan asylum. A colored orphan asylum, right? That was basically for American black kids and numbers of women, etc. Let me sit there and just share this. Hold on, make sure I read something. Okay, let me make sure I have. Okay, hold on. Okay, let me sit there and share my screen before I forget. No. Oh, I think I have to stop. Okay, okay, I gotta stop that. I can't have both of them at the same time. I didn't save something. So you see the screen here. So let me go ahead and okay, I think another picture can show up, but let me sit there and share the screen first. And I almost finished here. Make sure you see that. Okay, I can see that too. They deliberately talking about numbers of Irish. They deliberately set fireness to that building. It was the home of unoffending colored orphan children. The New York draft riots and the burning of the colored orphan asylum. This is why I can't stand, or one of the things I can't stand, is when the liability of the disgusting, diluting people of color word, communities of color, right? Minority, because you also would be considered talking about numbers of anti-American black numbers of people as well in society right now, the ones it applies to. That would also slot under that. And there are also numbers of women within the predominant culture that would be considered minorities. That's double dipping. They'll play women's card and then they go over there and play minority card. Oh, see, we don't want to talk about that. And unfortunately, there are certain numbers of naive American blacks, the ones it applies to, and some gullible ones that don't even know how silly it sounds to sit there and say they are a minority when you got numbers of women within the predominant culture and some other women can call themselves minorities too. And then switch over and get some resources and benefits playing women card, the one who know the game to play that. So you see already, they deliberately set fireness to it, simply because it was the home of unoffending colored orphan children. The New York draft riots. Did they say, were they talking about colored numbers of Hispanics, colored numbers of Asians, colored numbers of we call indigenous, whatever that's supposed to mean, right? Because that's thing called BIPOC, black, indigenous, and people of color. Nonsensical that there are certain numbers of American blacks fall for this. The ones who do fall for that are naive to allow people to put numbers of American blacks in a BIPOC category, black, indigenous, people of color. What? Wow. And some people now, this first time hearing about this, but I'm just saying, it's like when American blacks, the one supplies to allow people to put American blacks in a people of color and minority category, right? And what does this say? Colored. You see this? You see this? The rioters burning and sacking, you mean numbers of Irish, because predominantly Irish people was doing this. Burning and sacking the colored asylum, orphan asylum, Harper's Week, August the 1st, 1863. 1863 was after the per se potato famine that was going on in Ireland in the 1840s. So, who many ran from Ireland to come to America, right? 1863, when the numbers of vileness, a certain numbers of Irish that were acting like anti-American black, just savages toward American blacks, were trying to burn down a black orphan asylum, American black orphan asylum. Oh, people want to talk about this. For people who do know, you know what I'm talking about. But quite a number of people don't even know this. But walking around celebrating St. Patrick's Day, not for the religiosity, right? Not for that part, but the ones that be getting drunk. Talking about the ones applies to getting drunk and rowdy. Right? July marks the anniversary. Hold on. What is I think here? Give me a second. This is written July the 16th, 2013. July marks the anniversary of the New York draft riots, one of the bloodiest and most violent insurrections in American history. No, the Civil War was the hatred in some other places, other things, especially how many times you got slave riot rebellions, right? But anyway, on that, a perfect storm of social unrest, ethnic hatred. Watch the words here, not ethnic hatred. Watch the words. See, you got people that play sly little games. You mean American black hatred, not ethnic hatred. Let me keep going. The draft riots began on the morning of Monday, July the 13th, when hundreds of angry rioters stormed the office of the 9th District Province Marshal, which was located at 3rd Avenue and 47th Street. Ruins of the Provost Marshal Office, Harper's Weekly, August 1st, 1863. Basically, make a long story short on that, was because they had a conscriptionist for draft. And certain numbers of Irish personnel were pissed off because they thought, well, most of them was poor, right? Even though numbers of American blacks were poor too, and there was numbers of American blacks who were not poor. But again, we got this game that they always want to portray American blacks in a certain way, right? As this destitute, this pathetic. But then there was American blacks that were well educated. Numbers of American blacks that had business, American blacks that went to college, right? Again, going through all kind of hell, right? But Black History Month, oh my goodness, we don't even talk about that no more, right? That's woke. But at the same time, many ass people don't want to talk about, well, March is Irish American History Month. We're the same effing ass fools not calling Irish American History Month woke. Where are those damn fools at? Silly ass ones playing these little games. American blacks about to stop allowing people to play games with them like this, man. The horrors of the first day culminated in the burning of the Colored Orphan Asylum, which was located on 5th Avenue between 42nd. The horrors of the first day culminated in the burning of the Colored Orphan Asylum, which was located on 5th Avenue between 42nd and 43rd Street. The asylum, which was managed by the Association for the Benefit of Colored Orphans, was a large 4-story building surrounded by grounds and gardens. At that time, was a house between 600 and 800 children. You mean American black children. Colored orphan exterior, circa 1860, 1861. Look at that. Now, if American blacks were doing this to some Irish orphanage, right? It would have been hell, right? The records of the Association for the Benefit of Colored Orphans, which are held by the Patricia D. Klingenstein, I'm not going to go there, Library of New York. I'm going to go there. It is not known what, if any, records were destroyed by the fire, but we are fortunate enough to have such much of this organization's records intact. Although there are no entries for July 13, 1863, the minutes of the board meeting from July 25, 1863, several days after the riots of these anti-American black Irish ones that was doing this, the ones it applies to, ended. On July 13th at 4 p.m., an infuriated mob, you mean infuriated anti-American black Irish mob, the ones applies to, watch the minimizing, surround the premises of the asylum, and 500 of them entered the house. 500 anti-American black Irish mobbing type personnel, once applies to, they deliberately set fire to it simply because it was the home of the unoffending colored orphan children. You mean not genericalities. That's why I don't like this. Can't stand the colored wording. It is dilution. When does this happen? July the 13th. Oh, excuse me. When this happened? July 13th, 1863. 1863 to 2025. Let me say this again. July 13th, 1863 to March the 18th, 2025. And you can tell how long that is, right? Many generations ago, right? People are calling American blacks colored. And 100 years later, right, in the 70s, you got people still in the 80s calling black folks colored. Do you see this? How this goes? So numbers of American blacks, 2025, are still allowing people to put them in a people of color, minority, nonsensical dilution categories. Communities of color, people of color. In 1863, again, the major three populations were American blacks, whites, and Native Americans. Not numbers of Asians, whatever that's supposed to mean, right? Because Asia is a continent, right? And the only time around 1863 would have been a few little more, what we call Chinese personnel, not Japanese, not Laotian, not Vietnamese, not Indonesian, not Jakartians, what you want to call them, not Armenians. What do you mean Armenians? Yes, Armenia is an Asian country. Oh, many people don't know that. Iraqis, there were no Iraqis like that in 1863. There was no Pakistanis like that. There was no Afghanistanians like that. Do you see how this game, disgusting game, they keep playing when they just say Asian? And again, Armenians, Iranians, Iraqis, Pakistanians, etc. are considered Asians. Do you see how this goes? They won't even like that over here like that. But they're considered people of color and minorities. Oh, boy. Anyway, the 27th annual report, Association of the Benefit of the Colored Orphans, which covered 1863 and was published in 1864, describes the event of the day in more detail, mentioning how a rootless mob, you mean a rootless numbers of Irish mob, who's the predominant person in those mobs, of several hundred men, women and children, broke down the door with an axe and proceeded to ransack the building and set it afire. The mob, the numbers of Irish mob, stole whatever they could, even baby clothes, and were gifted to the site that were gifted to the asylum. Thankfully, while the Irish mob predominantly was focused on gaining interest, the superintendent of the asylum, colored asylum, William E. Davis, and the head matron, Jan McClellan, quietly snuck the children out of the back. I'm gonna stop right here. I'm tired of reading. It makes me tired. But at the same time, right? We're gonna celebrate Irish American St. Patrick's Day, right? Not the ceremonial part, right? But the circular, right? The tourist type part of it, which is fine. That's fine, whatever it is, right? Somebody wants to do all that. But at the same time, what about the insulting part of that sectionality as well, right? Of how many tell American blacks to get over the past. What I just sit there and read you about those draft riot acts that happened in 1863 by a savage numbers of Irish personnel, the ones applies to hundreds of them that ransacked and satisfied a colored orphanage or American black orphanage of numbers of women, numbers of kids. How many of them lost their dads in the Civil War? See that little bull crap, deadbeat dad bull crap? What about numbers of then? They don't deadbeat dads running around there. How many of them, again, were in the Civil War fighting? By the way, was all these freaking Irish personnel in the Civil War like that? Because many They would hide under the white banner, by the way. So they'd have been extremely minute as far as ethnic Irish. The second largest people that served in the service in the Civil War was American blacks. In 1863, still American blacks still would have not been considered citizens collectively. 1863, still the Chinese Exclusion Act hadn't even came upon like that, in that kind of time frame like that. The immigratingness wouldn't even, the generic immigratingness, left and right, different countries and backgrounds, wouldn't have been allowed like that. What we call Hispanicism, wasn't even like that. Oh, in America, like that. Right? Border break, illegal immigrant personnel, wasn't even like that. You see how this goes, but American blacks stood with bravery and humbleness and wanted to fight for this country in America against all odds of hatred, segregational laws and policies, and certain numbers of political personnel that had the hatred for American blacks. Right? And here it is, you got American blacks had to sit there and deal with certain type of hatred, numbers of Irish personnel, the ones applies to, that was doing this kind of nonsense. And what I read you earlier about certain numbers of Irish personnel, right, that became white Irish personnel, and how they had the hatred for American blacks also, that was still going on only a few generations so ago, that was still going in the 70s. When they were mad, when they didn't want to have black kids, American black kids, going to their schools. But at the same time, we want to celebrate this St. Patrick's Day, not because of the ceremonial or the religional aspect of it. No. Getting drunk version, getting rowdy, turning stuff up. That's what numbers of people like to celebrate. And certain numbers that we call Irish contributions, which is a whole generic part. They don't talk about the number of black Irish. Oh, they don't talk about, again, the black Irish. Oh, they don't like talking about that in Ireland, the black Irish. There are people right now in Americanism don't know nothing about the black Irish in Ireland. I'm gonna stop right here and play this because, again, to put this in perspective, when certain numbers of Irish personnel were coming over here a little bit more in the 1840s and 1850s during the potato famine, that they was running as fast as possible from Ireland, and which is crazy. And it's an insult as well on this part, that there is more people in 2025 that claim Irish ancestry than there is actually Irish people in Ireland. Let me say this again, 2025, there is more people in America that claim Irish ancestry than who actually are Irish people in Ireland. When I checked lastly, well, anyway, it's kind of hard for me to believe this, but it was estimated around about 30 plus million in America are claiming Irish ancestry. And remember, there's around about 40 to 44 million American blacks. You see how this goes? You see how that don't even sound right. So 30 plus million in America are claiming Irish ancestry. But at the same during time, around 44 million people in America are American blacks. Around about 40 something million. Probably around about 12 to 12.5, 13% will be considered American blacks, meaning lineage based to the 1800s. I make this point because, again, 1800s, right? And then only a few generations later, this was still going on. Now remember, 1840s, the potato famine that was going on, that was ravaging Ireland, and turned up numbers of Irish personnel that were extremely po. And they came over, the ones that's coming over in the 1840s, to run away as fast as possible from the Irish a potato famine in 1840s. A few generations later, this was still going on in America.
Who walked out of the Democratic convention formed their own party.
The Southern revolt against President Truman reaches its climax at Birmingham under the states' rights banner.
The so-called Dixiecrats nominated the South Carolina governor Strom Thurmond as their presidential candidate.
There's not enough troops in the army to force the Southern people to break down segregation and admit the Negro race into our theaters, into our swimming pools, into
nominated the South Carolina governor Strom Thurmond as their presidential candidate. Who walked out of the Democratic convention formed their own party.
The Southern revolt against President Truman reaches its climax at Birmingham under the states' rights banner.
The so-called Dixiecrats nominated the South Carolina governor Strom Thurmond as their presidential candidate.
There's not enough troops in the army to force the Southern people to break down segregation and admit the Negro race into our theaters, into our swimming pools, into our homes, and into our churches.
That was a 1948 presidential election, or soon to be presidential election, 1948. So almost 100 years later, from 1840s to the 1940s, 100 years, American blacks were still having to fight hatred by certain ones within the Paname's culture, the ones applies to, that still want to keep segregation alive, like this part of it. Give me a second, hero. One moment, hero. Where is it at? Oh.
I don't believe in segregation. I believe in slavery. I don't believe in segregation. I believe in slavery.
Right? But at the same time, oh my goodness, 2025 celebration of St. Patrick's Day or St. Patrick's Day, right? Oh, we got to celebrate the Irish contributions, but we ain't going to talk about the hatredness of certain numbers of Irish personnel. When I read about you, when I read about that, read to you, when Frederick Douglass was saying, right, of the hatred that was still that he knew of, that certain numbers of Irish people were showing toward the American blacks when they set foot on American soil, the ones it applies to in the 1840s. And I sit there and read you 100 plus years later, 1840s to 1970s is over 100 some plus years. When when black kids were trying to go, black kids were being put in desegregated schools, and you had buses that were being bombarded by certain numbers of Irish personnel. That was the 70s. And certain numbers of personnel within Paname's culture as well. You see how that sounds? The insultinginess. You had numbers of Irish in the 1840s that were considered white, but they want to be white. And they would look down upon. And they were showing hatred toward American blacks in the 1840s. The audacity. When American blacks were already building up America in the 1800s. And you got numbers of Irish personnel that were coming over especially around that potato famine, 1840s time frame, and showing hatred toward American blacks. Right? And from the 1840s to the 1970s, 100 plus years later, what I read to you, you still have certain numbers of Irish personnel that were showing hatred, that they did not want numbers of American black kids going to the school along with their white Irishness of kids, because they became honorary whites in the early 1900s. Anything to sit there and help certain people within certain parts of palm-based culture get a leg up even more over American blacks, extra. Because the whispers in the era was American blacks, might be getting a little bit more, freedoms. And certain ones within the palm-based culture, then and still now, the ones it applies to, do not want to sit there and see anything dealing with American blacks getting over, having a betterment than them. Even though certain numbers of personnel within the palm-based culture can't stand other numbers of personnel within the palm-based culture, but there is a caste system in there. And like anything else, the number one personnel that you must show hatred and blame is the American blacks. And so many within certain various parts of various other cultures and backgrounds who are latecomers, who benefit off American black pain, even ones that have the skin of black, who know they are, that ran away from certain parts of a continent in Africa, the ones applies to, from people that look like them, the ones that have major tribalism problems, the ones that come over, the ones that applies to, because there's good ones and bad ones. It's like certain parts of the beautiful Caribbean islands, the ones applies to, and have a disdain for American blacks. The nerve of that. The nerve. But won't fight back against colonizing and other cultures that are infiltrating their politicalness. That's how it goes. And businesses and getting resources. They won't sit there and fight back against that collectively. But getting to this topic and finishing, let's just celebrate Irish American History Month, right? Which is the whole month, just like Women's History Month. One of the several longest months in a year. 31 days. No problem. Celebrate Irish American History Month. But there's no such thing as telling numbers of Irish personnel to get over the past. Why would he celebrate Irish American History Month? Just call yourself Americans and end the story. Right? No. Let's not talk about any type of contributions that certain numbers of Irish people have accomplished. We don't talk about that. Just call yourself American, because if you start talking about Irish American accomplishments, right, isn't that called woke? You said it goes? Of course not. Just like in certain type of Native Americanness, the ones applies to, you got $5 Indians, you got ones within the palm-based culture, straight Angloism, put themselves on a roll, this document or documents, and to call them, paid a few dollars and call themselves Native Americans, right? And that's a golden goose egg, and they ain't trying to stop that. You understand? Just like certain types of Irish personnel, the ones applies to, the ones that became honorary, right, for years and years and years, they're going to give up that privilege of that. Ones that can dip in and dip back out, dip in and say I'm Anglo, dip back out, say, hey, we're ethnic, Irish, right? We must keep our own identity. Oh, let me close with that. So there's nothing wrong with certain numbers of Irish personnel to keep their type of identity. Even though there was colonized too, by the way, by certain other people that look like them. Oh, we don't talk about that. Oh, we don't talk about how numbers of, in Ireland, how many of them were conquered by certain ones that look like them in certain other countries. Oh, we won't talk about that. But then have the nerve to come over, especially we're talking about the 1840s, running from a potato famine and come over and having hatred for American blacks. And still, the 21st century, there are numbers of American blacks in certain eastern cities and some other places who know they are And they know that there are still certain numbers of Irish personnel, the ones it applies to, that have a hatred toward American blacks. And it's an insult. And it's embarrassment that there's not enough American blacks to sit there and start checkmating people, regardless. They say American blacks have had enough of the complete disrespect of the overall American black culture. Because if American black culture does not come together like this, let me come together like this, like that one, like you see on the left side, different kind of fragmentation of certain types of American blacks. This one in the middle, it's kind of, kind of sort of American black in this a little bit, doing a little thing here and there. But there's this big old giant wasp or hornet, wherever it is, represents certain ones within certain other, a combination of certain ones within Panamanian culture and some immigratingness and some border breaking. Some other groups that slot under people of color, minority, the ones it applies to, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And they come in and they can just, disrespect, one black here, one black there. But if American blacks came together and was like this, oh, you picking on one American black like this? Oh, you think you can destroy American black? Oh, individual. Oh, okay. You grab one us up? Okay. Well, we're finna show you. Oh, no disrespect. It's not gonna be tolerated by whoever. Ooh, if American blacks came together, was doing this toward however other cultures and backgrounds, constructively, letting them know American blacks are not to be fooled with. You're not gonna disrespect American blacks like that. No, I'm not talking about violence or anything like that. I'm talking about constructiveness of saying, be like, hey, American blacks are not to be tolerated or not to be disrespected collectively anymore, right? Again, I'm not talking about violence or anything like that, but constructive responses. People respect collective strongness. So if American blacks were collective strongness, if not playing by people bullying them and doing this, you disrespect one, you disrespect the rest. Oh, you best believe there'll be a major change. But at the same time, collectively, it's probably not going to happen because unfortunately, because of too many internal problems and too many thinking because they might have arrived and certain educational level, certain job level, certain businesses, many think they have arrived. And this is what certain numbers of people from different cultures and backgrounds and immigratingness, the ones applies to, and border break, illegal immigrants, a number of personnel they're doing when that type of ignorance is accepted overall. So thank you for tuning in to the Real CP show. How nice it would be. How nice it would be if American blacks came together just 20%, 25% like this. You mess with one American black, you mess with many others. There will be a gigantic change. A gigantic change.